A Mafia boss satisfied a runaway teen, and her new identity, with flawless makeup, turned the tables on everyone. Nobody in the borough of Brooklyn could have predicted that Vincent "Vic" Moretti, a man whose name alone made seasoned detectives look the other way, would find his empire reshaped by a 17-year-old girl with nothing but a torn backpack and a bruise she tried to hide beneath her sleeve. But life has a way of writing stories that no screenwriter would dare pitch because they would sound too unbelievable, too perfectly ironic, too painfully human. And yet this one happened, or at least something very close to it happened, in the cold, unforgiving streets of New York City during a winter that nobody who lived through it would ever forget. The Verrazzano Narrows Bridge stretches across the water like a steel promise connecting two worlds that want nothing to do with each other. On one side, Staten Island sleeps in its suburban quiet. On the other, Brooklyn hums with a restless energy that never fully dies, not even at 3 in the morning, not even when the temperature drops to 14 degrees and the wind cuts through every layer of clothing like it has a personal grudge. It was on the Brooklyn side of that bridge, on a Wednesday night in late January, that Carmine DeLuca first spotted her. Carmine was 53 years old, built like a refrigerator that had been left out in the rain, and he had been driving for Vincent Moretti for the better part of 2 decades. He had seen things in those 20 years that would make most people lose sleep for the rest of their lives. He had learned to keep his mouth shut, his eyes forward, and his opinions locked in a vault somewhere deep inside his chest. But even Carmine, with all his years of practiced indifference, could not ignore the girl standing on the pedestrian walkway of the bridge at 3:15 in the morning, wearing nothing but a hoodie and jeans in the kind of cold that could kill. He slowed. The black Escalade. In the back seat, Vincent Moretti looked up from his phone. Vincent was 58, silver-haired, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from expensive stone, angular, hard, but not without a certain elegance. He wore a charcoal overcoat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his eyes, dark and calculating, missed nothing. "What is it?" Vincent said. It was not a question. Vincent rarely asked questions. He made statements that other people understood were questions. "Kid on the bridge, boss," Carmine said. "Looks like she's in trouble." Vincent leaned forward and looked through the windshield. The girl was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair that the wind was tearing in every direction. She was gripping the railing with both hands, and even from inside the car, even through the glass, Vincent could see that she was shaking. Not the kind of shaking that comes from cold alone, but the full-body trembling of someone whose entire nervous system has decided that it has had enough. Vincent Moretti had built his empire on 3 principles. First, never let anyone see you hesitate. Second, loyalty is not given, it is earned, and once earned, it is absolute. Third, and this was the one that separated him from every other man in his position, never harm someone who cannot fight back. This third principle had made him enemies within his own world. There were men in the organization who thought Vincent was soft, who whispered behind his back that he lacked the stomach for the harder aspects of the business. Those men tended to disappear, not violently, but professionally. They would find their operations quietly absorbed, their contacts redirected, their relevance evaporated. Vincent did not need to raise his voice. He simply made people irrelevant, and in their world, irrelevance was worse than anything else. "Pull over," Vincent said. Carmine pulled the Escalade to the side. Vincent opened the door. Himself, which was unusual. Normally he waited for Carmine, but something about the girl on the bridge had triggered an instinct that Vincent had not felt in a very long time, an instinct that predated the empire, predated the money, predated the man he had become. It was the instinct of a boy who had once been cold and alone and terrified in a city that did not care whether he lived or died. He walked toward her slowly. The wind was vicious, and it pulled at his overcoat like an impatient child. The girl did not turn around. She was staring at the water below, black and churning, and her knuckles on the railing were white. "Rough night," Vincent said, stopping about 10 feet away from her. He kept his voice even, conversational. The way you might talk to a stray dog that you did not want to startle. The girl's head snapped toward him. Her eyes were wide and dark, and Vincent could see now that the bruise on her arm was not the only one. There was another one on her jaw, partially, hidden by her hair, and her lip was split. She looked at him the way a cornered animal looks at anything that moves, with a mixture of terror and defiance that was almost impossible to hold in the same gaze. "Go away," she said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been crying for a long time, or screaming, or both. "I would," Vincent said, "but it is 14 degrees, and you are standing on a bridge in a hoodie, and I have a very inconvenient conscience that will not let me drive away." "I don't need help." "I did not say you did. I said I have an inconvenient conscience. Those are two different things." She stared at him. The wind howled between them like a third participant in the conversation. Vincent put his hands in his pockets, not because he was cold, although he was, but because he wanted her to see that he was not reaching for anything, not moving toward her, not trying to grab her. He was just standing there, an old man in an expensive coat, talking. "What's your name?" he said. "Why do you care?" "I don't, particularly. But if I'm going to stand here and freeze to death, I'd like to know whose fault it is." Something flickered in her eyes. Not a smile, not yet, but the faintest ghost of something that might have become a smile in a different life, under different circumstances. "Maya," she said. "Maya, that's a good name. I'm Vincent. I know who you are." That surprised him, though he did not show it. "Do you?" "Everyone in Brooklyn knows who you are, Mr. Moretti." Vincent tilted his head slightly. "And yet you are not running away." "I've been running all night. I'm tired of running." There was something in the way she said it that made Vincent's chest tighten. It was not self-pity. It was exhaustion. The deep, bone-level exhaustion of someone who has been surviving for so long that they have forgotten what living feels like. "Where are you running from?" he said. Maya's jaw tightened. She looked back at the water. "Does it matter?" "It might." "My foster family, my fourth one. The dad, he—" She stopped. She swallowed. She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. The bruises finished it for her. Vincent Moretti had done many things in his life that most people would consider wrong. He had operated outside the law since he was 19 years old. He had built a criminal organization that controlled significant portions of Brooklyn's economy. He had made decisions that had consequences he chose not to think about when he lay in bed at night. But there were lines that Vincent Moretti did not cross, and there were things that Vincent Moretti did not tolerate, and what Maya was not saying was one of them. "Carmine," Vincent called without turning around. Carmine appeared beside the Escalade like a shadow that had learned to walk. "Boss? Bring the car around. We are taking the young lady to get something to eat." Maya shook her head. "I'm not getting in a car with you. I'm not stupid." "No," Vincent agreed. "You are clearly not stupid. You are also clearly freezing, clearly hungry, and clearly in need of a safer place to be than a bridge at 3 in the morning. I'm offering you a meal, not a contract. You can leave whenever you want." "People always say that. People are not me." Maya looked at him for a long time. The wind continued to tear at both of them, indifferent to the negotiation happening between a crime boss and a teenager. Finally, Maya let go of the railing. Her fingers were so stiff from the cold that she had to peel them away one at a time. "If you try anything," she said, "I will scream so loud that every cop in Brooklyn will come running." "If I try anything," Vincent said, "I will deserve it." He walked her to the car. Carmine held the door open, his face a masterpiece of professional neutrality. Maya climbed in, and the warmth of the heated seats hit her like a wave, and for the first time in what must have been hours, her body stopped shaking. They drove to a diner on 4th Avenue, one of those old-school Brooklyn diners with chrome counters and red vinyl booths, and a Greek owner named Stavros, who had been flipping pancakes since the Reagan administration. Stavros knew Vincent, of course. Everyone in this part of Brooklyn knew Vincent. But Stavros also knew not to ask questions, not to stare, and not to mention to anyone that Vincent Moretti had walked in at 3:30 in the morning with a teenage girl who looked like she had been through a war. Maya. ordered a cheeseburger, fries, a chocolate milkshake, and a side of onion rings. She ate with the desperate, focused efficiency of someone who had not had a proper meal in days. Vincent ordered black coffee and watched her eat, and he thought about his daughter, Angela, who had died in a car accident 11 years ago at the age of 16, and he pushed that thought down to the place where he kept all the thoughts that would destroy him if he ever let them out. "How old are you?" he said. 17. "How long have you been in the system?" "Since I was 9, my mom overdosed, never knew my dad." "And the foster homes?" Maya put down her cheeseburger. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "The first one was okay. The lady was nice, but she got sick and couldn't take care of me anymore. The second one was crowded, like 12 kids in a 3-bedroom house, and nobody really cared what happened to any of us. The third one was—" She paused. "The third one was bad. The fourth one was worse." "Worse how?" "I already told you." "You told me about the father. What about the mother?" She pretended not to see anything. "Easier that way, I guess. She got a check every month for having me there. As long as the money kept coming, she didn't care what he did." Vincent's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He thought about the foster father, about the kind of man who would hurt a child, and he felt something cold and precise settle into his chest, the way it always did when he identified a problem that needed to be solved. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he said. "If I had anywhere to go, I wouldn't have been on a bridge at 3 in the morning." "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment. Carmine stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the parking lot with the patient vigilance of a man who had been trained to expect trouble from every direction. "I have a proposition," Vincent said. Maya's eyes narrowed. "I already told you." "Not that kind of proposition. I'm 58 years old, Maya. And whatever you may have heard about me, I do not harm children, ever, under any circumstances. That is a line I will never cross. What I am offering is this. I have a large house in Bay Ridge. I live there alone mostly, except for Carmine and a woman named Rosa, who cooks and takes care of the place. There is a guest room on the 2nd floor that has not been used in years. You are welcome to stay there, for as long as you need, no questions asked, no strings attached until you figure out what you want to do next. Why? Because I can, and because it is the right thing to do, and because someone should have done it for me when I was your age and nobody did." Maya chewed on this the way she had chewed on her cheeseburger, carefully, thoroughly looking for bones. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that Rosa will make you eat breakfast every morning, and she will be extremely offended if you do not finish everything on your plate. She is Sicilian, and in her world, leaving food on your plate is a personal insult." Maya almost smiled. Almost. "One night," she said. "I'll stay one night, and if anything feels wrong, I'm gone." Agreed. They drove to Bay Ridge in silence. The house was a brownstone on a tree-lined street, the kind of house that looked like it belonged to a successful dentist or a retired judge, not a man who ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast. This was intentional. Vincent had always believed that the best way to hide power was to make it look ordinary. Rosa was waiting at the door, because Rosa was always waiting, because Rosa had a 6th sense for when Vincent was bringing home complications. She was 62, short, round, with silver hair pulled back in a bun, and eyes that could communicate entire novels without speaking a word. She took one look at Maya, at the bruises, at the torn backpack, at the exhaustion carved into every line of the girl's face, and she said, in a voice that brooked no argument, "Come, I will make you tea and then you will sleep." Maya followed Rosa upstairs. Vincent watched her go, and he felt something shift inside him, something tectonic and irreversible, like a fault line that had been dormant for years suddenly deciding to move. Carmine appeared beside him. "Boss, are you sure about this?" "No," Vincent said. "I am not sure about this at all. She could be a problem." "She is already a problem, Carmine. The question is whether she is my problem or the world's problem, and I have decided that she is mine." Carmine nodded. He did not argue. He never argued. He simply filed the information in the vast, well-organized archive of his mind, and he adjusted his operational parameters accordingly. Vincent went to his study. He sat in his leather chair, and he poured himself a glass of scotch, and he stared at the wall where a photograph of Angela hung, 16 years old forever, frozen in a moment of laughter that he could no longer hear, and he wondered if the universe was giving him a second chance or setting a trap. With the universe, it was always hard to tell. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this one, stories that start on a frozen bridge and end in places you would never expect, are shared here every week, and if you miss one, you will always wonder what happened next. Maya stayed one night, then she stayed another, then a week passed, and then 2 weeks, and she was still there, sleeping in the guest room with the pale blue walls and the heavy curtains that blocked out the streetlights, eating Rosa's breakfasts, and slowly, cautiously, like a wild animal learning to trust the hand that feeds it, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was not a trap. The first few days were the hardest. Maya kept her backpack packed and ready by the door, as if she might need to flee at any moment. She flinched when anyone raised their voice. She ate, quickly, hunched over her plate, protecting her food with her arms, in a way that broke Rosa's heart so completely that the old woman had to excuse herself and cry in the pantry. She did not make eye contact with Vincent, and she spoke in short, clipped sentences that gave away nothing. But Rosa was patient in the way that only Sicilian grandmothers can be patient, with a stubborn, unyielding warmth that does not take no for an answer. She made Maya's favorite foods, once she figured out what they were. She left clean clothes folded on the bed. She hummed while she cooked, old Italian songs that filled the house with a sense of safety that was almost physical, like a blanket made of sound. And Vincent, for his part, kept his distance. He went to work every morning, meaning he went to the office on Atlantic Avenue where he conducted the legitimate side of his business, a chain of dry cleaners, a construction company, 2 restaurants, a real estate firm. The illegitimate side was handled elsewhere, in conversations that Maya was never present for, in rooms she was never invited to enter. Vincent kept those 2 worlds separate with the precision of a surgeon. But he noticed things. He noticed that Maya was smart. Not just street smart, although she was certainly that, but genuinely ferociously intelligent. He found her reading in the living room one evening, not on her phone, but an actual book, a battered copy of The Great Gatsby that she had found on his bookshelf. "You like Fitzgerald," he said, surprised. "I like anybody who writes about people pretending to be something they're not," Maya said without looking up. "It feels familiar." Vincent sat down across from her. "Have you been to school recently?" "Not regularly. Hard to keep a schedule when you're moving every 6 months. Would you like to go back?" Maya finally looked up. Her expression was guarded, but beneath the guard, Vincent could see something else. Hunger. Not for food, but for the thing that food represented. Stability, normalcy, a life that made sense. "Maybe," she said, "but I can't exactly enroll myself. I'm a minor in the system. If I show up at a school, they'll call CPS, and CPS will send me back." "Leave that to me," Vincent said. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to make some phone calls." Vincent Moretti's phone calls were not like other people's phone calls. When Vincent Moretti made a phone call, things happened. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with a quiet inevitability that was far more powerful than any display of force. Within a week, a woman named Patricia Greenfield, who was a family court judge in Kings County, had approved a temporary guardianship arrangement that placed Maya in Vincent's care. The paperwork was immaculate. The process was technically legal. The fact that Patricia Greenfield owed Vincent a favor that dated back to a complicated situation involving her brother's gambling debts was never mentioned, and never needed to be. Maya was enrolled at a private school in Park Slope, the kind of school where the children of diplomats and hedge fund managers and tech entrepreneurs sat in oak-paneled classrooms and discussed literature and ethics and the finer points of calculus. Maya arrived on her first day wearing clothes that Rosa had bought for her, simple, clean, well-fitting, and she felt like an alien who had crash-landed on a planet where everyone spoke a language she did not understand. She understood the academic material. That was not the problem. The problem was everything else. The way the other students talked, with their easy confidence and their casual references to summer houses and ski trips and gap years in Europe. The way they looked at her, not with cruelty exactly, but with a polite curiosity that was almost worse, the way you might look at an unusual animal at the zoo, the way they assumed things about her, that she had parents, that she had a home, that she had always been safe, assumptions that Maya could not correct without revealing everything she was trying to hide. She came home after the first day and sat in the kitchen while Rosa made dinner, and she did not say anything for a long time. "That bad," Rosa said. "They're not mean," Maya said. They live in a different world." "The world is the same everywhere, Bambina. People are the same everywhere. Some are kind, some are cruel. Most are just afraid." Afraid of what? Of being seen, of being known, of someone looking at them and seeing the truth. Maya thought about this. "What's the truth?" Rosa smiled. "That nobody has it figured out. Not the rich ones, not the poor ones, not the old ones, not the young ones. Everyone is just pretending every single day and hoping that nobody notices." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to Maya, and she carried it with her like a talisman, not a magical one, just a true one, which is far more powerful. Over the next few weeks, something began to change in Maya. It was subtle at first, barely visible, like the first green shoot pushing through frozen ground. She started doing her homework without being asked. She started asking Rosa to teach her to cook. She started leaving her backpack in the closet instead of by the door. Small things, insignificant to anyone who was not paying attention. But Vincent was paying attention, and he recognized them for what they were, the first tentative steps of someone who was beginning to believe that she might be allowed to stay. And then there was the makeup. It started one Saturday when Maya was watching videos on her phone, tutorials, she explained when Rosa asked, about contouring, highlighting, color theory, the architecture of a face. Maya was fascinated by it, not in the way that most teenage girls are fascinated by makeup, as a tool for fitting in or looking pretty, but in a different way, a deeper way. She saw it as transformation. She saw it as the ability to become someone else, to take the face you were given and reshape it into the face you wanted, to erase what you wanted erased and emphasize what you wanted seen. "It's like armor," she told Rosa, "but prettier." Rosa bought her a basic makeup kit, foundation, concealer, a few brushes, a palette of eyeshadows. Maya took to it with the same fierce intelligence she applied to everything else. Within weeks, she was good. Within a month, she was remarkable. She practiced on herself, on Rosa, who submitted with amused patience, and eventually on a mannequin head that Vincent bought for her after she mentioned, offhandedly, that professional makeup artists use them for practice. She watched every tutorial she could find. She studied the techniques of special effects artists, of drag queens, of theatrical makeup designers. She learned how light and shadow could reshape a face completely, how the right application of color could make cheekbones appear where there were none, could narrow a wide nose, could make small eyes look enormous. She learned that makeup was not about beauty. It was about architecture. It was about understanding the geometry of a face and then rebuilding it, the way a contractor might renovate a house, and she was extraordinarily talented at it. Vincent noticed this talent the way he noticed everything, quietly, from a distance, filing it away for future reference. He had built his empire on the ability to recognize talent and put it to use, and he recognized in Maya's steady hands and sharp eye something that went beyond a hobby. This was a skill. This was a gift. And gifts in Vincent's world were never wasted. But he did not say anything. Not yet. He had learned, in 58 years of life, that the most important things require the most patience, and that the worst thing you can do to a person who is just beginning to trust you is to make them feel used. So he waited. And he watched. And he let Maya grow at her own pace, in EQ, her own way, in the safety of a house that was funded by money she was better off not knowing about, protected by a man whose real business she was better off not understanding. The school situation improved slowly. Maya found an ally in a girl named Jordan Chen, whose parents were both doctors at Mount Sinai and who had the rare gift of being genuinely kind without being performative about it. Jordan was curious about Maya's background, but respectful enough not to push, and the two of them developed a friendship that was built on shared interests: books, movies, a mutual contempt for the performative social dynamics of wealthy teenagers, rather than shared circumstances. Jordan was the first person Maya practiced makeup on outside the house. She transformed Jordan's face for a Halloween party, turning her into a convincingly terrifying zombie with nothing but drugstore makeup and a set of brushes, and the result was so impressive that Jordan posted photos on social media, and within days 3 other girls from school were asking Maya if she could do their makeup for various events. Maya charged them $20 each. It was her first income, and she kept the bills in a jar on her dresser, and sometimes she would take them out and count them, not because she needed to know how much was there, but because the act of counting money she had earned herself, with her own skill and her own hands, made her feel something she had never felt before: capable. Months passed. Winter became spring. The trees on the Bay Ridge streets exploded into bloom, and the city shed its grey skin and put on colours that seemed almost aggressive after the monochrome of January. Maya turned 18 in April, and Rosa made a cake with 17 candles. She miscounted, and nobody corrected her because nobody wanted to spoil the moment. And Carmine sang "Happy Birthday" in a baritone so deep it rattled the windows, and Maya blew out the candles and made a wish that she did not share with anyone. She had been with Vincent for almost 3 months, and she had not once asked him what he did for a living. She had not asked because she already knew, had always known, from the moment she recognized him on the bridge. Everyone in Brooklyn knew what Vincent Moretti was. The question was not what he was, but who he was, and Maya had come to understand that those were very different questions with very different answers. What he was, she could not control. Who he was: the man who stopped on a bridge, the man who gave her a room, the man who bought her a mannequin head so she could practice makeup, the man who sat across from her at the dinner table and listened when she talked about Fitzgerald as if what she had to say actually mattered. That was the Vincent she knew. That was the Vincent she had begun, despite every instinct screaming at her not to care about. But the world outside the brownstone in Bay Ridge did not care about who Vincent was. The world outside cared about what he was, and the world outside was about to come knocking. The trouble arrived in the form of a man named Dominic Ferrara. Dominic was 45, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with slicked-back hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was Vincent's underboss, the second in command, the man who handled the operations that Vincent preferred to keep at arm's length. Dominic had been loyal for years, or at least he had appeared loyal, which in their world was often the same thing. But Dominic had ambitions that exceeded his station, and he had recently begun to feel that Vincent's leadership was becoming soft. The incident with the girl on the bridge, the fact that Vincent had taken in a stray, a nobody, a foster kid with no connections and no value, confirmed everything Dominic had been whispering to the other captains for months. Vincent Moretti was losing his edge. Dominic came to the brownstone on a Tuesday evening, unannounced, which was itself a violation of protocol. Vincent received him in the study, the room with the leather chair and the scotch and the photograph of Angela on the wall, and Dominic sat across from him and got straight to the point. "People are talking, Vic." "People are always talking, Dominic. That is what people do. They're saying you've gone soft. They're saying you've lost focus. They're saying you've taken in some street kid and you're playing house instead of running the business." Vincent's expression did not change. "And what do you say, Dominic?" "I say they might have a point." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight, that has texture, that presses against the walls of a room and makes the air itself feel heavier. Vincent looked at Dominic the way a chess player looks at a board, calculating not just the next move, but the 12 moves after it. "The girl is not your concern," Vincent said. "Everything that affects the organization is my concern. That's my job." "Your job is what I say it is." Dominic leaned forward. "Vic, listen, I respect you. I've always respected you. But the other captains, they're getting restless. Tony Bianchi is talking about breaking off his crew and going independent. Marco Rinaldi says he hasn't seen his cut in 2 weeks. And now there's a rumor going around that the feds have a new task force, and they're looking at us, specifically, and people are nervous. And when people are nervous, they need to see strength. Not a charity. I will deal with Tony. I will deal with Marco. And if the feds want to look at us, let them look. They have been looking for 30 years, and they have not found anything worth finding because we do not give them anything worth finding. And the girl. The girl stays. This conversation is over. Dominic left. But Vincent knew, with the certainty of a man who had survived in his world for decades by reading people the way others read books, that the conversation was not over. It was just beginning. What Vincent did not know, because even Vincent Moretti could not know everything, was that Maya had heard the entire conversation. She had been coming downstairs to get a glass of water, and she had frozen on the landing when she heard voices in the study, and she had stood there barefoot on the hardwood floor, and she had listened, and she had understood with a clarity that hit her like cold water exactly what her presence in this house was costing the man who had saved her. She went back to her room. She sat on the bed. She picked up the mannequin head and she held it in her lap, and she stared at its blank, featureless face, and she thought about masks. She thought about the masks she had worn her entire life. The tough girl mask, the I don't care mask, the I don't need anyone mask. She thought about the masks that Vincent wore, the crime boss mask, the cold businessman mask, the I am in control mask. She thought about how everyone, everywhere, was wearing masks all the time, and how the only difference between people was whether their masks were good enough to fool anyone. And then she thought about Dominic Ferrara, and the way his smile never reached his eyes, and the way he had said, "the girl," as if she were a piece of furniture that was cluttering up the room, and she felt something ignite inside her chest, not fear, not sadness, but something harder, something sharper. It was resolve. It was the decision, made in the quiet of a room, with pale blue walls, that she was not going to be a burden. She was not going to be the reason that Vincent Moretti's empire crumbled. She was not going to be a liability. She was going to be an asset. Right now, I want you to pause and think about this. Have you ever been in a situation where someone believed in you when nobody else did? Type in the comments, "I know what it feels like." Because this next part of Maya's story is about to change everything. The idea came to her in the middle of the night, the way the best ideas always do, fully formed, slightly insane, and impossible to ignore. Maya knew things about the foster system, about the streets, about the invisible world of people who fell through the cracks of society that most people in Vincent's world did not know. She knew how to disappear. She knew how to become someone else. She knew how to read a room, how to identify who was dangerous and who was not, how to sense a lie the way some people sense a change in the weather. These were survival skills, honed by years of living in places where survival was never guaranteed, and they were, Maya realized, exactly the kind of skills that could be useful in Vincent's world. And she had one additional skill that nobody else had. She could change faces, not with surgery, not with technology, with makeup, with brushes and pigment, and an understanding of light and shadow so precise, so intuitive, that she could take a face and make it unrecognizable. She could age a person 20 years. She could make a man look like a woman. She could erase distinguishing features, scars, birthmarks, the shape of a nose, and replace them with entirely different ones. She could create, with nothing but a kit of cosmetics and steady hands, a new identity. She spent the next week developing the idea, refining it, testing it. She practiced on herself first, transforming her own face so completely that when she walked into the kitchen one morning, Rosa screamed and dropped a pan of eggs because she did not recognize the person standing in her kitchen. Maya had changed the shape of her jawline, darkened her skin by 3 shades, altered the apparent size of her eyes, and reshaped her nose with contouring so precise that it looked like she had had surgical work done. "Madre di Dio," Rosa said, clutching her chest. "Maya, is that you?" "It's me, Rosa. I thought you were a stranger. I thought someone had broken in." "That's the point." Rosa stared at her. Then she laughed, a full, rich belly laugh that shook her entire body. "You are a remarkable girl, you know that. I'm starting to." The next step was harder. Maya needed to present her idea to Vincent, and she needed to do it in a way that would not make him think she was a child playing games. She needed to be professional. She needed to be convincing. She needed to show him, not just tell him, what she could do. She prepared for 3 days. She assembled a portfolio of her work, before and after, photographs of every transformation she had done, including the ones on herself, on Rosa, on Jordan, on the mannequin head. She wrote a brief proposal, something she had learned to do in one of her better foster homes, where the mother had been a small business owner. And she rehearsed her pitch until she could deliver it without hesitation, without apology, without the defensive posture that she defaulted to whenever she felt vulnerable. On a Friday evening, when Vincent was in his study reading the Wall Street Journal, Maya knocked on the door. "Come in," Vincent said. Maya walked in. She was wearing the transformation she had prepared for the occasion. She had made herself look 10 years older, with subtle changes to her bone structure, her skin tone, and her eye shape that made her look like a completely different person. Vincent looked up, and for the first time in as long as Maya had known him, his face showed genuine surprise. "Who?" he started, and then he stopped. And then he looked more closely, and then he leaned back in his chair and said very quietly, "Maya." "It's all makeup," she said. "Every bit of it. I can wash it off in 15 minutes and be myself again." Vincent was silent for a long time. He studied her face with the same analytical intensity he brought to everything: business deals, personnel decisions, chess games. He looked at the jawline, the cheekbones, the way the contouring had altered the apparent depth of her eye sockets. He looked at the subtle aging around her mouth and forehead, the way she had made her skin appear to have a different texture entirely. "That is extraordinary," he said. "I know. And you did this yourself. I've been practicing for months. Show me the portfolio." She showed him. She walked him through every transformation, explaining the techniques, the products, the principles of light and shadow that made it possible. She showed him the before and after photos, and she watched his eyes move between them. And she saw the moment when he stopped seeing a hobby and started seeing a tool. "I want to work for you," Maya said. Vincent looked at her. "You are 18 years old. I've been taking care of myself since I was 9. Age is irrelevant. What exactly are you proposing?" "I know that people in your world sometimes need to not be recognized. I know that there are situations where looking like someone else, or not looking like yourself, could be the difference between a good outcome and a bad one. I'm not asking to be involved in anything complicated. I'm asking to provide a service, a specialized service, identity transformation through professional cosmetic techniques." Vincent was quiet again. He picked up his glass of scotch, took a sip, and set it down. He looked at the photograph of Angela on the wall, and then he looked back at Maya, and in his eyes there was a conflict playing out: the businessman who recognized an extraordinary opportunity, and the guardian who wanted to protect her from exactly this kind of opportunity. "There are risks," he said. "There are risks in everything. There were risks in staying in that foster home. There were risks in standing on that bridge. At least this way, the risks are mine to choose. If Dominic finds out, Dominic won't find out. That's the whole point. Nobody will know it's me. Nobody will know I'm involved at all." Vincent finished his scotch. He poured another one. He drank half of it. "We will start small," he said. Test, I have a situation next week that requires discretion. If you can do what you say you can do, we will discuss terms." "What kind of situation?" "I have a meeting with a man who has never met me face to face. He has only spoken to me on the phone. It is a business meeting, a legitimate one, but there are people who would be very interested to know that this meeting is taking place. If I attend looking like myself, there will be surveillance photographs. If I attend looking like someone else, there won't be." "Precisely." Maya nodded. She felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, felt the balance of power in the room tilting, felt herself moving from passenger to participant, from rescued to rescuer, from the girl on the bridge to something else entirely. Something she did not yet have a name for, but that felt for the first time in her life like purpose. "I'll need better supplies," she said. "Professional-grade products, prosthetic pieces, a proper workspace. Make a list. Carmine will get everything you need. And I'll need to study your face, not now, over the next few days. I need to understand its geometry, its bone structure, the way light falls on it from different angles. The transformation only works if I understand the starting point completely." "Agreed." Maya turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. "Vincent." "Yes." "Thank you. Not for this. For the bridge." "You have already thanked me for the bridge." "I know. But some things deserve to be said more than once." She left the study, and Vincent sat alone with his scotch and his photograph and the slowly dawning realization that the girl he had rescued from a bridge on a January night was about to become the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal, and that he was not entirely sure how he felt about that. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan called Luciano's, the kind of place where a plate of pasta costs $45 and the breadbasket alone would pay for a week of groceries in some neighborhoods. The man Vincent was meeting was named Gerald Ashworth, a real estate developer from Connecticut who controlled a portfolio of commercial properties that Vincent wanted to acquire for his legitimate business operations. The acquisition was entirely legal, but Vincent's involvement would attract attention from law enforcement agencies who monitored his every public appearance, and that attention would make Ashworth nervous, and a nervous Ashworth might back out of the deal. So Vincent would attend the meeting as someone else. Maya spent 5 days preparing. She studied Vincent's face with a clinical precision that made even Carmine uncomfortable. She photographed him from every angle in every type of light: natural, fluorescent, incandescent, the blue glow of a phone screen. She measured the proportions of his features with a tailor's tape, recording numbers in a small notebook that she kept with her at all times. She studied his bone structure, the set of his jaw, the way his cheekbones caught shadows in the late afternoon. She memorized the patterns of his wrinkles, the exact shade of his skin, olive with warm undertones, slightly ruddy around the nose from years of scotch, the thickness and color of his eyebrows, salt and pepper, heavier on the left side than the right. And then she began to design the transformation. She did not want to make Vincent look younger or older. She wanted to make him look like a different person entirely, a person who shared none of Vincent's distinguishing features, a person who could sit in a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan and be photographed from every angle and still not trigger a match in any facial recognition database or any surveillance analyst's memory. She started with the nose. Vincent's nose was distinctive, strong, slightly hooked, with a small bump on the bridge from a break he had suffered in his 20s. Maya built a prosthetic piece from medical-grade silicone, shaping it by hand until it was smooth, straight, and unremarkable. She attached it with adhesive and blended the edges so seamlessly that even at close range, it was impossible to tell where the prosthetic ended and the real skin began. Next, the jawline. Vincent's jaw was square and prominent, a feature that gave his face its characteristic authority. Maya used a combination of contouring and small prosthetic pads to soften it, rounding the angles, making the face appear wider and less angular. She altered the apparent shape of his chin, making it slightly recessive where it was normally strong. The eyes were the hardest part. Vincent's eyes were his most recognizable feature: dark, deep-set, intense, the kind of eyes that made people feel like they were being X-rayed. Maya could not change the color. Colored contacts were an option, but Vincent refused to wear them, saying they made him feel like a clown. But she could change the context. She altered the shape of his brow ridge with prosthetics, making his eyes appear more open, less hooded. She adjusted the contouring around his eye sockets to change the apparent depth. She used subtle techniques to make his eyes look slightly closer together, which changed the entire balance of his face. She added a mustache, not a prosthetic one, but one created entirely with makeup, hair by hair, using a technique she had learned from a YouTube tutorial posted by a Broadway makeup artist. The mustache was salt and pepper, neatly trimmed, and so convincing that Carmine actually reached out to touch it and was shocked when his fingers met smooth skin. She changed his hairline with a custom piece that altered the apparent shape of his forehead. She added subtle age spots that were not in the same places as Vincent's real age spots. She changed the color and texture of his skin by 2 shades, enough to look like a different person, but not so much that it would look unnatural under. Restaurant lighting. When she was finished, she stepped back and looked at what she had created. The man sitting in the chair was not Vincent Moretti. He was someone else entirely, a pleasant-looking man in his late 50s, the kind of man you might see in a country club or a church or a PTA meeting, the kind of man who was so thoroughly, unremarkably ordinary that your eyes would slide right past him without registering a single detail. "Well?" Vincent said, looking at himself in the mirror. He tilted his head left, then right. He opened his mouth. He raised his eyebrows. The prosthetics moved with his face as if they were part of it. "I have to say, Maya, I do not have the words." "You look like an accountant from New Jersey," Maya said. "That's exactly what you should look like." "I look like someone I would never invite to dinner. That's the highest compliment you could give me." Carmine drove them to Midtown. Maya went along, sitting in the front seat with a bag of supplies in case any touch-ups were needed. She had also, at her own initiative, prepared a secondary identity for herself. She had transformed her own face so that she looked like a woman in her mid-20s, professional, forgettable, the kind of person who might be an executive assistant or a junior associate at a law firm. If anyone asked, she was Vincent's, or rather the accountant from New Jersey's niece, tagging along for a business dinner. The meeting with Gerald Ashworth went flawlessly. Ashworth was a large, jovial man with a red face and the booming laugh of someone who had never had to worry about being overheard. He shook Vincent's hand without a flicker of recognition, without the slightest hesitation, without any indication that he was sitting across from one of the most powerful crime figures on the East Coast. They discussed the property acquisition over 3 courses of Italian food, and by dessert, the deal was done. In the car on the way home, Vincent was silent for a long time. Maya sat in the back seat with him, carefully removing her own prosthetics and wiping away the makeup that had transformed her into someone else. Underneath, she was herself again, 18 years old, dark-haired, still carrying the remnants of bruises that had long since healed on the outside, but would take much longer to heal on the inside. "Maya," Vincent said. "Yeah. You have a remarkable gift." "I know. I want you to understand something. What happened tonight, that was a legitimate business transaction. The real estate deal is clean. There is nothing about what we did tonight that was, in any legal sense, wrong. But there may come a time when I ask you to do this for reasons that are not entirely clean. And when that time comes, I want you to know that you can say no. You can always say no. You are not obligated to me, Maya. You are not indebted to me. You owe me nothing." Maya looked out the window at the city sliding past, the towers of Manhattan giving way to the lower skyline of Brooklyn, the lights of the Verrazzano Bridge glinting in the distance like the teeth of a giant metal smile. "You saved my life, Vincent. I gave you a meal and a room. You saved your own life. You gave me more than that. You gave me a chance, and where I come from, people don't give you chances. They give you reasons to give up. So when the time comes, I won't say no. Not because I owe you. Because I choose this. Because for the first time in my life I have something I'm good at, and someone who sees it and a place where it matters, and I'm not going to throw that away just because the lines are blurry." Vincent nodded slowly. He did not argue with her, because he recognized, in her words and in her eyes, the same stubborn determination that had built his own empire. The refusal to be small, the refusal to be invisible, the refusal to accept that the world has the right to decide what you are worth. "Carmine," he said. "Yes, boss. Add Maya to the security detail." "As what?" "As whatever she wants to be." Carmine glanced in the rearview mirror at Maya, and for the first time in the 20 years she had known him, which was admittedly only 3 months, but Carmine felt like he had been there forever, she saw something that might have been a smile. "Welcome aboard, kid," Carmine said. And just like that, Maya's new life began. Over the following months, word spread, quietly, carefully, through channels that existed below the surface of public life, that Vincent Moretti had a new asset. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew her name. She was referred to in the hushed conversations that took place in back rooms and private clubs as the artist, and her reputation grew the way reputations grow in that world, through results. She transformed a witness who needed to disappear before a trial, giving him a new face that allowed him to walk past federal marshals without being recognized. She created a disguise for a businessman who needed to attend a meeting without being identified by a rival, who had hired private investigators to track his movements. She aged a young man by 30 years so that he could impersonate his own grandfather in a complicated real estate transaction that was, if you squinted hard enough, almost legal. Each job paid well. Maya opened a bank account, a real one, in her real name, and she watched the numbers grow with the same quiet satisfaction she had felt, counting the $20 bills in her jar. She was not rich, not by the standards of Vincent's world, but she was stable, and for someone who had spent her entire life on the edge of destitution, stability was more valuable than gold. She continued her education too. She attended school regularly, maintained excellent grades, and applied to college. Not because she expected to go, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she could. She was accepted at NYU with a partial scholarship, and when she received the letter, she sat in her room and she read it 3 times, and then she cried. Not because she was sad, but because she was overwhelmed by the realization that the future was no longer a dark room full of unknown threats. It was a door, and she was standing in front of it, and she had the key. But even as Maya's star rose, Dominic Ferrara's resentment grew. Dominic had been watching. Dominic had been listening. Dominic had been asking questions, and some of those questions had led to answers he did not like. He did not know who the artist was. Maya had been careful, and Vincent had been careful, and Carmine had been a brick wall of silence. But he knew that someone new was in Vincent's inner circle, someone who had access and influence and trust, and that someone was not him. Dominic's ambition was not the kind that could be managed or redirected. It was the kind that grew in the dark, feeding on grievance and ego and a deep, corrosive sense of entitlement. He believed with the unshakable conviction of a man who has confused desire with destiny that he was meant to lead, that Vincent was standing in his way, and that the removal of Vincent was not betrayal, but inevitability. He began making plans. The crisis came in September, 8 months after Maya had arrived in Vincent's life. It started with a phone call. Vincent was in his study, and Carmine was at the door, and Maya was upstairs in the room she had converted into a workshop, a room filled with lights, mirrors, prosthetics, brushes, palettes, and the organized chaos of someone who was very good at what they did. She was working on a new technique, something she had been developing for weeks, a method of altering the apparent shape of someone's skull using a combination of prosthetics and strategic hairstyling that would defeat even the most advanced facial recognition software. The phone rang. Vincent answered. Maya heard his voice through the floor, low, steady, controlled, and then she heard something she had never heard before, a long, heavy silence that seemed to press down on the entire house like a weight. She went downstairs. Carmine was already moving, checking windows, locking doors, doing the things that Carmine did when the atmosphere shifted from routine to emergency. Vincent was standing in the middle of his study, the phone still in his hand, and his face was the face of a man who has just been told something that changes everything. "What happened?" Maya said. Vincent looked at her. "Dominic," he said, "he has made his move." "What move?" "He has gone to the other captains. He has told them that I am compromised, that I am under federal investigation, that my arrest is imminent, and that anyone who remains loyal to me will go down with me." "Is it true, the federal investigation?" "There is always a federal investigation, Maya. There has been one for 30 years. That is not the point. The point is that Dominic is using it as a pretext to take control, and some of the captains are listening." "How many?" "Enough." Maya felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. What does he want? He wants a meeting. All the captains, all in one room. He says it is to discuss the future of the organization. What he means is that he wants to announce his leadership and force me to step aside, or worse. When? Friday, 3 days from now. Where? The restaurant on Flatbush, the one in the back room. Maya was quiet. Her mind was working the way it always worked when she was designing a transformation, rapidly, precisely, seeing angles and possibilities that other people missed, constructing a plan the way she constructed a face, layer by layer, detail by detail, until the whole picture emerged. I have an idea, she said. I am listening. Dominic has never met me. None of the captains have. Nobody in the organization knows what the artist looks like. They know the artist exists, but they don't know it's me. They don't know my age, they don't know my gender. I'm a ghost. Go on. What if I'm at that meeting? Absolutely not. Not as Maya, as someone else, someone that Dominic trusts or at least doesn't suspect, someone who can sit in that room and listen and watch and tell you exactly what is happening, who is loyal and who is not, before Dominic makes his move. Vincent shook his head. It is too dangerous. These are not businessmen, Maya. These are violent men who will respond violently if they feel threatened. They won't feel threatened by someone they don't notice. That's the whole point. I can be anyone. I can be a waitress. I can be a bartender. I can be an associate's girlfriend. I can be invisible in a room full of people who are looking for threats, because they will be looking for threats that look like threats, and I will look like nothing. Maya, Vincent, listen to me. You saved me. You gave me everything. And now someone is trying to take it away from you. And I am not going to sit upstairs and practice contouring while your empire burns. I am going to help you. That is not a request. That is a statement. The silence that followed was different from the one before. This one was not heavy with dread. It was electric with possibility, with the tension of a decision being made, with the invisible chemistry of trust being tested and found strong enough to hold. Carmine, Vincent said. Boss, we need a plan. And so they made one. The plan was simple in concept and extraordinarily complex in execution. Maya would attend the meeting disguised as a server at the restaurant, a new hire, brought on for the event, someone who would be in the room but not at the table, someone who would be seen but not noticed. She would carry no recording devices, too risky, and no communication equipment, too detectable. She would rely entirely on her own senses, her eyes, her ears, and her ability to read people, an ability that had been sharpened by 17 years of survival in environments where reading people correctly was the difference between safety and harm. She would observe. She would listen. And when the meeting was over, she would report everything to Vincent. Every word, every expression, every shifted glance and crossed arm and nervous laugh. And Vincent would use that information to make his move. Maya spent the next 3 days preparing. She created a disguise that was, in many ways, her masterpiece. She did not try to be beautiful or striking. She tried to be forgettable. She studied the faces of real servers, the way they moved, the way they held their trays, the way they made eye contact, just enough to be polite and then looked away, the way they existed in a state of professional invisibility that made them perfect witnesses to conversations they were never meant to hear. She aged herself by about 7 years, giving herself the face of a woman in her mid-20s, someone who might be working 2 jobs and going to community college at night, someone who was tired and competent and completely uninteresting. She changed her skin tone slightly, altered the shape of her eyes, softened her jawline, and added small, realistic imperfections. A faint scar on her chin, a slightly crooked tooth visible when she smiled, the kind of details that made a face feel lived in and authentic rather than constructed. She practiced the walk. She practiced the posture. She practiced carrying a tray of drinks without spilling, which turned out to be significantly harder than any makeup technique she had ever mastered. Rosa helped her with this, producing a silver tray from the kitchen and loading it with glasses of water, and making Maya walk circuits around the dining room table until she could do it without trembling, without sloshing, without drawing any attention to the fact that she had never waited a table in her life. On Friday morning, Maya woke up early. She ate Rosa's breakfast, eggs, toast, fruit, strong coffee, and she went to her workshop and she began the transformation. It took 2 hours. When she was finished, she looked in the mirror and she saw a stranger looking back at her, and she felt the familiar thrill that always accompanied a successful transformation, the dizzying, almost intoxicating sensation of being someone else, of inhabiting a different life, of proving once again that identity was not fixed, but fluid, not permanent, but chosen. Carmine drove her to the restaurant. He did not like the plan. He had made this clear multiple times in his quiet, firm way, but he had also accepted it because he accepted what Vincent accepted, and Vincent had accepted it because he recognized something in Maya that overrode his instinct to protect her. He recognized her right to make her own decisions. The restaurant was on Flatbush Avenue, a large Italian place called Bella Notte that had been a front for organization business for as long as anyone could remember. The back room was a private dining area with a long table, heavy chairs, thick walls, and no windows. It was a room designed for conversations that were not meant to be overheard, and the irony of Maya slipping into it disguised as a server was not lost on her. She arrived 2 hours early and introduced herself to the manager as a temp sent by the staffing agency. She had, of course, no actual connection to any staffing agency, but Carmine had made a phone call, and the manager was expecting a new server, and the new server was Maya, and nobody asked any questions because in this part of Brooklyn, nobody ever asked questions about anything connected to Vincent Moretti's operations. She set up the back room. She laid the table. She filled the water glasses. She arranged the bread baskets and the olive oil and the small plates of antipasto that would be waiting when the guests arrived. And then she waited, standing by the wall in her white shirt and black apron, her hands folded, her face blank, her heart beating so fast she could feel it in her teeth. They arrived at 7. Dominic Ferrara came first, confident, strutting, wearing a suit that was slightly too expensive for his position, as if he were already dressing for the promotion he expected to receive. Behind him came the captains, Tony Bianchi, a stocky, balding man in his 60s with the demeanor of a bad-tempered bulldog, Marco Rinaldi, younger, sharper, with nervous eyes that never stayed in one place, Leo Santini, the oldest of the group at 71, a quiet man who had survived 5 decades in the organization by saying as little as possible, and 3 others whose names Maya did not know, but whose faces she memorized instantly, filing them away in the vast archive of her visual memory. Vincent arrived last, which was deliberate. In their world, the man who arrived last was the man who mattered most, and Vincent wanted to remind everyone, especially Dominic, who that man was. He walked in alone. No Carmine. Carmine was outside in the car on alert. He wore his usual charcoal overcoat, and his face was his own face. No disguise, no transformation, no mask. He was Vincent Moretti, and he had decided that tonight, of all nights, he needed to be exactly who he was. Maya poured water. She brought bread. She carried plates of food from the kitchen to the table and removed empty plates and refilled glasses and did all the invisible work of a server, and not once did any of the 7 men at the table look at her with anything more than the reflexive, dismissive glance that powerful men give to the people who serve them. She was furniture, she was wallpaper, she was exactly what she had designed herself to be, invisible. But she saw everything. She saw the way Dominic positioned himself at the head of the table, directly across from Vincent, claiming a physical authority that he had not been granted. She saw the way Tony Bianchi kept looking at Dominic and then looking at Vincent, his small eyes, calculating, weighing his options, trying to determine which side would be the winning side. She saw the way Marco Rinaldi fidgeted with his silverware, nervous, uncommitted, the kind of man who would follow whoever was winning at any given moment. She saw the way Leo Santini sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, his face revealing nothing, a man who had survived by being unreadable and intended to go on surviving in exactly the same way. and she saw the way Vincent sat, calm, composed, his eyes moving slowly around the table, taking in the same things Maya was taking in, drawing the same conclusions, running the same calculations. Their eyes met once, briefly, when Maya leaned forward to pour his wine, and in that fraction of a second, a communication passed between them that was more eloquent than any speech. I see what you see. I know what you know. We are going to be fine. The conversation started with pleasantries, the kind of empty social lubricant that men in that world used to avoid getting to the point. How's your wife? How's business? Did you see the game last night? The Yankees, the weather, the price of real estate? And then Dominic cleared his throat, and the pleasantries stopped, and the room got very quiet. We all know why we're here, Dominic said. So let me get to it. Vic, I got respect for you. We all do. You built this thing, and nobody's taking that away from you. But the reality is, the game has changed. The feds are smarter than they used to be. The technology is better, the risks are higher, and we need leadership that's focused, that's not distracted by personal projects. Personal projects, Vincent repeated. You know what I mean. I do. But I'd like you to say it. Dominic's jaw tightened. Fine. You took in a kid off the street, a nobody, and you've been spending time and resources on this kid instead of focusing on the business. And people are noticing. The captains are noticing. The feds are noticing. And it makes us look weak. The business has never been more profitable, Vincent said mildly. Last quarter's numbers were the highest in 5 years. Every operation is running smoothly. Every captain is receiving his full share, on time as always. If the business were a patient, Dominic, the doctor would say it is in perfect health. It's not about the numbers. It's about perception. Perception is your word for gossip. Perception is what keeps the feds at arm's length. Perception is what keeps the other families from testing our borders. Perception is everything, Vic. And right now the perception is that you have gone soft. Vincent leaned back in his chair. He picked up his wine glass. He took a sip. He set it down. These movements were slow and deliberate, and Maya recognized them for what they were. Not hesitation, but calculation. Vincent was giving Dominic enough rope to hang himself with, and Dominic, in his arrogance, was reaching for the rope with both hands. What are you proposing, Dominic? I'm proposing a transition, orderly, respectful. You step back into an advisory role. You keep your percentage. You keep your house. You keep your family. He said this last word with a faint sneer. And I step into the leadership position and bring us into the next decade with the focus and the strength that the organization needs. The room was silent. Maya stood by the wall, perfectly still, and she watched the faces of the captains the way a meteorologist watches a radar screen, looking for the patterns that predicted the storm. Tony Bianchi was leaning toward Dominic, not literally, but emotionally, his body language, the way he was looking at Dominic with a kind of approval, the way he was nodding, almost imperceptibly. Tony had made his choice. Marco Rinaldi was looking at the table. He was not meeting anyone's eyes. He was waiting, the way he always waited, to see which way the wind was blowing before committing. Marco had not made his choice. Leo Santini was looking at Vincent, just looking with those ancient, unreadable eyes, and Maya could not tell what he was thinking, could not tell which way he was leaning, could not read the book that was written in a language she did not speak. The other 3 captains were a mix of uncomfortable and angry, but Maya could not determine the direction of their anger, whether it was aimed at Dominic for his presumption or at Vincent for his perceived weakness. Vincent set his wineglass down with a small, precise click. I appreciate your candor, Dominic, he said, and I appreciate the clarity of your ambition, but I must decline your proposal. This isn't a request, Vic. Everything is a request, Dominic, until it isn't. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Maya felt it, felt the air tighten, felt the invisible line being drawn between the 2 men, felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge, and she understood, with a visceral certainty, that the next few seconds would determine not just the future of the organization, but the future of everyone in this room. Vincent stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each captain in turn, and when he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it filled the room the way water fills a glass, completely, irresistibly, leaving no space for anything else. I built this organization from nothing. I built it when I was 20 years old with no money, no connections, no family, and no safety net. I built it by being smarter, more patient, and more disciplined than every other person in this room. I have led it for 38 years, and in those 38 years, not one of you has ever been arrested. Not one of you has ever been indicted. Not one of you has ever spent a single night in a cell. That is not an accident. That is leadership. He paused. He let the words settle. Dominic says I have gone soft. Dominic says I am distracted. Dominic says the business needs new leadership. What Dominic does not say is that Dominic has been skimming from the construction contracts for the past 18 months. What Dominic does not say is that Dominic has been meeting privately with representatives of the Calabresi family discussing a potential merger that would dissolve our organization and absorb our operations into theirs. What Dominic does not say is that Dominic has been wearing a wire to our meetings for the past 6 weeks. The silence that followed was not the silence of a quiet room. It was the silence of a bomb that has been detonated but has not yet produced its shockwave. Every person at the table went absolutely still. Dominic's face drained of color so completely that he looked like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. That, Dominic said, and his voice cracked, that is a lie. Stand up, Dominic. I'm not. Stand up. Dominic stood. His hands were shaking. Maya watched from her position by the wall, invisible, forgotten, a ghost with perfect recall, and she saw the exact moment when Dominic knew that he was finished. Vincent walked around the table. He stopped in front of Dominic. He reached out, and with the precise, unhurried movements of a man who had all the time in the world, he unbuttoned Dominic's jacket and opened it. Taped to Dominic's chest, beneath his shirt, was a small device, a listening device, a wire. The room erupted. Tony Bianchi, who had been leaning toward Dominic 30 seconds ago, pushed his chair back from the table so violently that it fell over. Marco Rinaldi stood up and took 3 steps away from Dominic, as if proximity alone might incriminate him. Leo Santini remained seated, but his ancient eyes were fixed on Dominic with an expression that Maya could now read very clearly. Contempt. The device has been deactivated, Vincent said calmly. It has been deactivated since last Tuesday, when my people identified it and replaced the transmitter with a component that broadcasts static. Whatever Dominic's handlers expected to hear from this meeting, they heard nothing. Dominic was staring at the device on his chest as if he had never seen it before, as if it had appeared there by magic, as if the evidence of his betrayal was someone else's responsibility. How? He whispered. I have resources, Dominic. I have always had resources. I have resources you do not know about, resources you have never seen, resources that have been working quietly and effectively while you have been busy believing that you are the smartest person in the room. Vincent looked at the other captains. Gentlemen, the situation is clear. Dominic has betrayed this organization. He has cooperated with federal authorities. He has negotiated with a rival family for the dissolution of our operations. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable, and it has been collected over a period of months by a specialist in my employ. Maya felt a small, warm glow in her chest. A specialist. She was a specialist. What happens now is up to each of you, Vincent continued. You can stand with me as I have stood with you for 38 years, or you can walk out of this room and take your chances on your own. Either way, this organization will continue because I will continue, and anyone who stands with me will continue to prosper exactly as they always have. Tony Bianchi was the first to speak. I'm with you, Vic. Always have been. His voice was loud and emphatic, the voice of a man who was desperately trying to erase the memory of his earlier disloyalty. I never trusted this guy. I always said there was something off about him. Marco Rinaldi nodded vigorously. Me too, Vic. 100%. Leo Santini spoke last, and he spoke only one word. Vincent. But the way he said it communicated everything. Respect, loyalty, acknowledgement, an old man's approval of a leader who had proven once again that he deserved to lead. One by one, the other. Captains added their voices. The consensus was unanimous. Dominic stood alone, abandoned, his wire dead on his chest, his ambitions evaporated, his career over. Vincent nodded to two men who had appeared at the back door, men Maya had not seen before, large and expressionless, the kind of men who existed to handle situations exactly like this one. "Escort Mr. Ferrara out," Vincent said. "See that he leaves Brooklyn by morning. See that he understands that returning would be inadvisable." Dominic was led out of the room. He did not speak. He did not resist. He walked like a man who had been unplugged from reality, a man whose entire world had collapsed so quickly and so completely that he had not yet had time to process the ruins. The meeting continued for another hour, during which Vincent redistributed Dominic's responsibilities among the remaining captains, addressed their concerns about the federal investigation — he had a plan, he always had a plan — and restored the confidence that Dominic had worked so hard to undermine. By the time the last captain left, shaking Vincent's hand and reaffirming his loyalty, the crisis was over. Maya cleaned the table. She collected the plates, the glasses, the silverware. She wiped down the surfaces and straightened the chairs and did all the invisible work that invisible people do when the important people have left the room. And then she went outside, where Carmine was waiting with the Escalade, and she climbed into the back seat, and she let out a breath that felt like she had been holding it for 3 hours, which, in a sense, she had. Vincent climbed in beside her. "How did you know?" Maya said. "About the wire." "You." "What?" "3 weeks ago, you did a transformation for a meeting I had downtown. After the meeting, you told me that one of the men at the table was sitting oddly, that his jacket was hanging wrong on one side, that there was a slight bulge beneath his shirt that was inconsistent with his body type. You said it looked like he was carrying something under his clothes. I remember. That man was one of Dominic's associates. Based on your observation, I had my people look into it, and they discovered the wire. From there, the entire conspiracy unraveled." Maya stared at him. You saved the organization, Maya. With your eyes. With the same eyes that see the shape of a jawline, the shadow of a cheekbone, the geometry of a face. You saw what nobody else saw, because you look at people the way nobody else looks at people. Maya sat in the back of the Escalade, and she looked at her hands, the hands that could transform a face, the hands that could create a new identity from nothing, the hands that had once gripped the railing of a bridge in the freezing dark, and she felt something move inside her that was bigger than pride, bigger than satisfaction, bigger than the warm glow of being praised by a man she respected. It was the feeling of becoming, not becoming someone else the way she did when she put on a disguise, becoming herself fully and for the first time the real Maya, the one who had always been there, hidden beneath the masks and the bruises and the fear, waiting for someone to see her. "Thank you, Vincent," she said. "For what?" "For letting me prove myself. I did not let you do anything. You did it yourself. I merely had the good sense to stay out of the way." Carmine started the engine. The Escalade pulled away from the restaurant, merging into the river of lights that was Brooklyn at night, and they drove home, the three of them, in a silence that was not empty, but full of things understood, and things unspoken, and things that did not need to be said, because they were already irrevocably true. If you have watched this far, it is because this story has touched something in you, something real. Tap the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. 1 year later, Maya stood in front of the mirror in her workshop, and the face looking back at her was her own. No prosthetics, no contouring, no disguise. Just Maya, 19 years old, with dark hair and dark eyes, and a scar on her chin that she had decided not to hide anymore, because scars are not imperfections. Scars are evidence that you survived something that tried to break you, and you are still standing. She was getting ready for the first day of her freshman year at NYU. The past year had been a transformation more profound than anything she had ever achieved with makeup. She had testified, voluntarily and under subpoena protection, about the conditions in her former foster home, and her testimony, along with the testimonies of 3 other former foster children, that a lawyer hired by Vincent had tracked down, had led to the investigation and prosecution of her former foster father. He was now awaiting trial, and the foster home had been permanently shut down. Maya had, asked the lawyer, a formidable woman named Claire Weston, who wore her hair in a severe bun and her convictions like armor, whether the other children in the home were safe. Claire had assured her that they were. Maya had also, with Vincent's support and Rosa's relentless encouragement, obtained her GED, aced her college entrance exams, and been accepted at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, where she planned to study makeup design for film and theater. Her portfolio, which included before and after, photographs of over 30 transformations, some of which she could not explain to the admissions committee in detail, had been described by one professor as the most impressive application I have reviewed in 20 years of teaching. She had moved out of the brownstone in Bay Ridge. Not far, she had an apartment in Sunset Park, close enough that Rosa could visit with containers of food and complaints about how thin Maya was getting, but far enough to feel like her own space, her own life, her own beginning. She still worked for Vincent. The arrangement had evolved, become more structured, more professional. Maya now operated as an independent contractor, providing identity transformation services for Vincent's organization on a case-by-case basis. She set her own schedule, chose her own clients, and maintained a strict set of ethical boundaries that she and Vincent had negotiated together. She would not participate in anything that could harm an innocent person. She would not create disguises for anyone fleeing justice for violent acts. She would not use her skills to deceive people who did not deserve to be deceived. These boundaries were, Vincent acknowledged, unusual in his world. But Vincent had learned something important over the past year, something that Maya had taught him without either of them realizing it, that the most valuable people are the ones with principles, because principles make a person predictable, and predictability, in a world of chaos and betrayal, was worth more than any amount of blind obedience. Dominic Ferrara was gone. He had left Brooklyn the night of the meeting and had not returned. The federal investigation, deprived of its informant and its evidence, had stalled and eventually been redirected to other targets. The organization was stable, profitable, and unified, and Vincent's leadership was unquestioned. But Vincent had changed too. He was softer, not in the way that Dominic had meant, not weaker, but gentler, more willing to show the human being beneath the leader. He attended Maya's school events. He asked about her classes. He argued with her about books. He preferred Hemingway, she preferred Fitzgerald, and neither of them was willing to concede the point. He learned, slowly and with considerable effort, to open the door to the vault where he kept his feelings and let some of them out into the light. One evening, a week before Maya started at NYU, they sat together in the study. Angela's photograph was still on the wall, and Maya had noticed that Vincent had placed a second photograph next to it, a picture of Maya, taken by Rosa at her 18th birthday party, blowing out candles on a cake with 17 candles, her face illuminated by the small flames, her eyes closed in the moment of making a wish. "You never told me what you wished for," Vincent said. Maya looked at the photograph. "I wished for exactly this," she said. "Not the specifics. I didn't wish for a brownstone in Bay Ridge, or a Sicilian grandmother, or a crime boss guardian. I wished for a place to belong. I wished for people who would see me. I wished for a chance to become whoever I was supposed to be." "And have you become who I'm supposed to be? I don't know. I think becoming who you're supposed to be is a lifelong project, but I've started, and starting is the hardest part." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maya, there is something I want to tell you. Something I have never told you." "Okay. When I stopped on that bridge, it was not entirely altruistic. I stopped because I saw a girl who reminded me of Angela, not physically, but in the way she was holding on, in the desperation, in the refusal to let go, even when everything in the world was telling her to. I know. You know? I've always known. The photograph. The way you looked at me that first night. The room upstairs, with the pale blue walls. That was Angela's room, wasn't it? Vincent nodded. He did not speak. It doesn't change anything, Vincent. You might have stopped because of Angela, but you stayed because of me, and that's what matters. The old man smiled. It was a rare thing, a Vincent Moretti smile, and Maya treasured it the way she treasured all rare things, by paying close attention and committing every detail to memory. On her first day at NYU, Maya woke at 5 in the morning. She showered, dressed, and sat down at her vanity, the same vanity where she had designed transformations for crime, bosses and businessmen and witnesses, and she looked at her own face in the mirror, and she did not pick up a single brush. She went to school, bare-faced. She walked through Washington Square Park in the early September light, the trees just beginning to turn, the city waking up around her, and she felt the anonymity of it. The beautiful, liberating anonymity of being a 19-year-old girl walking to class in a city of 8 million people, invisible not because she was disguised, but because she was ordinary, because she was one of them, because she belonged. She thought about the bridge. She thought about the cold, the railing, the black water below. She thought about the man in the charcoal overcoat who had stopped when he did not have to stop, who had offered her a meal when he could have driven past, who had given her a room and a family and a future when the world had given her nothing. She thought about Rosa and her breakfasts and her Sicilian songs. She thought about Carmine and his baritone and his unwavering silent loyalty. She thought about Dominic and his wire and his ambition, and she thought about how easily things could have gone differently, how many moments along the way could have broken in the wrong direction, how many choices had to be made exactly right for her to end up here, walking through a park on a September morning, on her way to a future she had not dared to imagine 1 year ago. And she thought about makeup, about the masks we wear, and the faces we show and the identities we construct to survive in a world that does not always welcome us as we are. She thought about how she had spent her entire life hiding, behind tough words, behind defensive posture, behind the carefully constructed armor of someone who has been hurt too many times to risk being vulnerable. And she thought about how the greatest transformation she had ever performed was not the one she had done on Vincent's face in that chair, or the disguise she had worn to the meeting at Bella Notte, or any of the dozens of transformations she had performed for clients and associates. The greatest transformation was the one she had done on herself, not with makeup, not with prosthetics or contouring or pigment, with courage, with trust, with the terrifying, exhilarating decision to stop hiding and start becoming. She arrived at her first class 5 minutes early. She took a seat near the front. The professor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had spent 20 years doing makeup for Broadway shows, looked at the room full of students and said, "Welcome to Introduction to Makeup Design. Before we begin, I want each of you to tell me why you're here. Not the polished version, the real version." When it was Maya's turn, she stood up. She looked at the room full of strangers, and she felt the old instinct rise up. The instinct to deflect, to minimize, to hide behind a mask, and then she let it go. "My name is Maya," she said, "and I'm here because someone once told me that makeup is like armor, but prettier. And I believed that for a long time, but I have learned that makeup is not armor. Armor is for people who are afraid of being hit. Makeup is for people who want to be seen. And for the first time in my life, I am not afraid of being seen." She sat down. The room was quiet. And then the girl next to her, a freckled redhead with paint-stained fingers, leaned over and whispered, "That was the coolest thing anyone has ever said in a classroom." Maya smiled, a real smile. Not a mask, not a performance, not a carefully calibrated expression designed to communicate something she was not feeling. Just a smile, genuine and unguarded, the kind of smile that comes from a place so deep inside you that you did not even know it existed until someone found it. That evening, she went back to Bay Ridge for dinner. Rosa made pasta. Carmine told a story about a time he had accidentally locked himself out of the Escalade in the rain, and everyone laughed, even Vincent, who laughed so rarely that the sound of it made Rosa cross herself in genuine surprise. After dinner, Maya helped Rosa wash the dishes, and Rosa said, "You are happy, Bambina." "I am, Rosa." "Good. You deserve it. You deserve all of it." "So do you." "I have my kitchen and my pasta and my people. What more could an old Sicilian woman want?" Maya dried the last plate and put it away. She kissed Rosa on the cheek, which made the old woman's eyes shine with unshed tears, and she went to the front door, where Carmine was waiting to drive her home. On the doorstep she paused. She looked up at the brownstone, at its ordinary facade, at the windows that glowed with warm light, at the roof that sheltered a life she had never expected to have. And she thought about all the houses she had lived in, the crowded foster home, the dangerous one, the one she had to run away from in the middle of the night, and she understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, in its beauty, that a house is not a home. A home is not a place. A home is the people who see you, the people who stay, the people who choose you, not because they have to, but because they want to. She got in the car. Carmine pulled away from the curb. The lights of Bay Ridge slid past the windows, warm and golden, and Maya leaned her head against the glass and closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was not running from something. She was running toward it. The Mafia boss rescued a runaway teen. Her new identity with flawless makeup turned the tables. But the real transformation was never about the makeup. It was never about the disguises, the prosthetics, the contouring, the art of becoming someone else. The real transformation was about a girl who learned that the bravest thing you can do is not to hide behind a mask. It is to take the mask off and let the world see who you really are, scars and all. And it was about a man who learned that the strongest thing a leader can do is not to hold on to power. It is to use that power to lift someone up, to give someone a chance, to stop on a bridge on a frozen night and say, "I have an inconvenient conscience." Some people will tell you that the world is cruel, and they are right. Some people will tell you that people cannot change, and they are wrong. And some people will tell you that it is too late, that you have been broken too many times, that the damage is too deep, that the masks have been on too long. And to those people, Maya would say what she said on her first day of college, in a voice that trembled but did not break, "I am not afraid of being seen." If you watch this all the way to the end, it is because you felt something, and I want to hear from you. Leave a comment right now saying, "I watched until the end, so I can know who you are, so I can know who really connects with these stories here on this channel." Your comment means more than you think. It tells me to keep going. It tells me that these stories matter. And it tells me that you are out there somewhere watching, feeling, and refusing to give up. Hit the subscribe button if you have not already, because every week this channel brings you stories that are not just entertainment. They are mirrors, they are reminders. They are proof that even the darkest nights end in daylight. Tap the like button, because that simple gesture pushes this story to someone who needs to hear it. Tonight, someone who is standing on their own bridge in their own cold, waiting for someone to stop. And share this video with someone you care about, because the best stories are the ones we do not keep to ourselves. This was the story of Maya, the girl on the bridge, the artist, the specialist, the woman who learned that her greatest power was not the ability to become someone else. It was the courage to become herself. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, it is never too late to take off the mask.